The gunshot cracked through the dry Arizona air just as Cassidy Porter rounded the bend in the canyon. And he knew, without seeing, that someone was in serious trouble. He had been riding for 3 days straight from Tucson toward Palisade, a small mining town nestled in the rocky terrain, where he hoped to find work at one of the silver operations. The year was 1882, and honest work was getting harder to find as more men flooded west with dreams of striking it rich. Cassidy was no prospector, though. He was a cowboy through and through, raised on a cattle ranch in Texas before his family lost everything to drought and debt. Now he drifted from place to place, taking work where he could find it, trying to save enough to maybe start something of his own one day. The second gunshot made his decision for him. He spurred his horse, a reliable chestnut mare named Copper, toward the sound. The canyon walls echoed with shouts now, rough male voices, and one that made his blood run cold. A woman screaming. Cassidy dismounted before Copper even stopped moving, pulling his rifle from its saddle holster in one practiced motion. He crept along the rocky outcropping that overlooked a small clearing beside what remained of a creek, now just a trickle in the late summer heat. What he saw made his jaw tighten. 4 men had surrounded a stagecoach that looked like it had thrown a wheel. The horses were gone, probably spooked off or stolen. One man lay motionless on the ground, the driver by the looks of his worn leather vest. The other 3 outlaws were circling a woman who stood with her back against the disabled coach, holding what looked like a small derringer that would be useless against their rifles at anything but point-blank range. She was young, maybe 20 or so, with dark blonde hair that had come loose from its pins and hung around her shoulders. Her dress was torn at the sleeve, and even from this distance, Cassidy could see she was terrified but trying not to show it. That kind of courage deserved help. "Come on now, pretty lady," one of the outlaws was saying, his voice carried up to where Cassidy crouched. "Just hand over whatever valuables you got in that coach and maybe we will let you walk away from this." "You killed an innocent man," she said, and her voice shook but held firm. "I've got nothing for murderers," the outlaw who had spoken laughed. "Well now, that is not very friendly. Boys, I think we should search that coach ourselves, and maybe the lady too." The other 2 laughed, and Cassidy had heard enough. He stood up from behind the rocks, rifle raised. "I think you boys should ride on out of here." 4 heads snapped up toward him. The woman's eyes went wide. The outlaws were quick, he would give them that. The one who had been doing the talking swung his rifle around, but Cassidy fired first. The bullet kicked up dust at the man's feet, making him stumble backward. "Next one goes higher," Cassidy called out. "I am a fair shot and I have got the high ground. You want to test me?" "There is only one of him," another outlaw hissed, but his eyes were nervous. He could see what Cassidy had already planned. From up here, Cassidy could pick them off while they struggled to aim uphill. It was not good odds for them. The leader swore viciously. "This is not over. That coach was ours by right of finding it." "Funny kind of right that involves murder," Cassidy said. "Now mount up and ride before I change my mind about letting you leave breathing." For a moment he thought they might try it anyway. His finger tensed on the trigger. Then the leader spat into the dust and jerked his head toward where their horses were tied. "Come on. Not worth dying over." Cassidy kept his rifle trained on them as they mounted and rode off toward the west, back in the direction of the setting sun. He waited until they were out of sight before making his way down the rocky slope to the clearing. The woman still had her derringer raised, now pointed at him. Her hands shook, but her stance was steady. "Stop right there." He did, holding his rifle pointed at the ground. "Madam, I am not here to hurt you. Name is Cassidy Porter, just a cowboy passing through who heard gunfire." "How do I know you are not with them?" If I was with them, they would have shot me when I showed up, not ridden off. And I would not have scared them off just to hurt you myself. That does not make much sense now, does it? She studied him for a long moment, then slowly lowered the derringer. As soon as she did, her whole body seemed to sag. I am sorry. I am just that man. They shot him for no reason. He was just the driver. He had a family. Cassidy approached slowly, setting his rifle against the coach. The dead man lay sprawled in the dust, a single bullet wound in his chest. He was maybe 40 with a weathered face and work-worn hands. Cassidy crouched down and gently closed his eyes. Did you know him? His name was Henry. Henry Matthews. He was taking me to Palisade. My uncle arranged for the coach. Her voice broke. He had a wife, 3 children. He showed me their picture before we left Tucson. He was so proud of them. I am sorry, Cassidy said quietly. He stood and looked at her properly for the first time. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her fine dress or the pearl earrings she wore. It was something in her eyes, an intelligence and strength that showed even through her fear and grief. What is your name? Beatrice. Beatrice Olsen. She wrapped her arms around herself. I was coming to Palisade to live with my uncle. My parents died last year of fever, and I have been living with my aunt in Tucson, but she is getting remarried and her new husband did not want. Well, it does not matter. My uncle is the assayer in Palisade. He sent money for the coach. Cassidy looked at the disabled vehicle. The wheel was not just thrown but broken, probably hit a rock too hard. This coach is not going anywhere, and it will be dark soon. Those men might come back with reinforcements or other predators might show up. We need to move. We cannot just leave Henry here in the dirt. No, madam, we cannot. Cassidy looked around and spotted a stand of scrub oak growing near the creek bed. The ground there would be softer. Help me move him. They worked in silence as the sun dipped lower, digging as best they could with a shovel from the coach's storage box and rocks to break up the hard earth. It was not a proper grave, not 6 feet down like it should be, but it was the best they could do. Cassidy carved Henry's name and the date into a flat rock while Beatrice said a prayer over the mound. His family should know, she said as they finished. He should have a proper burial. When we get to Palisade, we will send word. I promise you that. Cassidy wiped the sweat from his face. The sun was nearly gone now, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and red. We need to get moving. Can you ride? I have ridden before, but I do not have a horse. You will ride with me. Copper can handle 2 for a stretch. How far to Palisade? Henry said it was about 20 miles. We left early this morning from Tucson, and he said we would arrive by evening if we kept good pace. Cassidy nodded. Too far to make it tonight, especially riding double. We will need to find a place to camp. He went to the coach and began pulling out Beatrice's belongings. There were 2 carpet bags and a small trunk. We cannot take the trunk, it is too heavy. Pack what you need most into the bags. She did not argue, just set to work transferring clothes and personal items. Cassidy noticed she took a small framed photograph, a Bible and a bundle of letters tied with ribbon. The rest she left behind with obvious reluctance. I will come back for the trunk, he said, or send someone. It will still be here. That is kind of you. She straightened, holding both carpet bags. I have money. My uncle sent it for expenses. I can pay you for your help. Let us worry about that later. Right now, let us focus on staying alive. He helped her mount Copper, then swung up behind her. She was rigid at first, uncomfortable with the closeness, but as they started moving, she relaxed slightly. He could feel her trembling, though, the shock of the day starting to set in. They rode for about an hour, following the creek bed as it wound through the canyon. Cassidy kept alert for any sign of the outlaws or trouble, but the desert was quiet except for the evening calls of birds and the distant yip of coyotes. Finally, they reached a spot where the canyon widened out, and a cluster of cottonwood trees grew thick beside a pool fed by the creek. "We will stop here," he said, dismounting and helping her down. "There is water and cover. We can have a small fire, but I will keep it low." Beatrice nodded, looking exhausted. She sank down onto a fallen log while Cassidy unsaddled Copper and let the mare drink and graze. He gathered deadwood and made a small fire, then pulled jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags along with coffee. "It is not much, but it will do for tonight," he said, handing her some of the dried meat. She took it mechanically and chewed without seeming to taste it. The fire crackled between them as full darkness fell. The stars came out in force, the way they only did out in the desert, far from any town lights. "I cannot believe Henry is dead," she said finally. "This morning he was telling me about his youngest daughter. She is learning to read." He was so proud. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Those men killed him like he was nothing, like his life did not matter. Cassidy poured coffee into his tin cup and handed it to her. "His life mattered. That is why we buried him proper and why we will make sure his family knows. Some men out here got no respect for life, no respect for anything but what they can take. But that does not mean good people do not matter. Henry mattered. You matter. That is why I could not just ride past." She looked at him over the rim of the cup. "Why did you stop? You could have been killed." "You did not know me or Henry." He was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "My pa used to say that a man is defined by what he does when it is easier to look away. I could not look away, not from a woman in trouble, not from murder. My ma raised me better than that." "Your parents sound like good people." They were, both gone now. Pa died 5 years back, Ma 2 years after that, lost the ranch to the bank. He poured himself coffee. "Been drifting since then. Working cattle drives, ranch handwork, whatever I can find. I am sorry about your parents." "I understand loss." She sipped the coffee, making a face at the bitter taste but drinking it anyway. "My parents owned a mercantile in Texas, in a little town called Blessing. When the fever came through, it took them both within a week of each other. I was 17. My aunt was my mother's sister, so I went to her in Tucson. But she barely knew me, and now with her new husband." She shrugged. "I am grateful to my uncle for taking me in. I have never met him, but he was kind enough to send money and offer me a home. What does an assayer's niece do in a mining town? I can read and write well. I thought perhaps I could teach or help with bookkeeping. I am not afraid of hard work." She met his eyes. "I know I look like some pampered thing in this dress, but I worked in my parents' store. I know how to keep accounts and manage inventory and deal with difficult customers. I can take care of myself. You proved that today. Not many people would stand up to armed outlaws, even with a gun." I was terrified. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite it. They sat in companionable silence for a while, finishing their meager meal. Cassidy showed her how to make a bedroll with her saddle blanket and one of the extra blankets from his gear. He would sleep with his back against a tree, rifle across his lap, keeping watch as much as he could. "You should try to sleep," he said as she settled into the bedroll. "We have got a long ride tomorrow." "Will those men come back?" "I do not think so. They were cowards at heart. Cowards do not seek out fair fights, but I will keep watch just in case." She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Thank you, Cassidy, for everything. I do not know what would have happened if you had not come along. Try not to think about it. You are safe now." She closed her eyes, and gradually her breathing evened out into sleep. Cassidy sat watching the fire burn down to coals, listening to the night sounds and thinking. He had been alone for a long time now, drifting from place to place with no real purpose except survival. Meeting Beatrice had stirred something in him, something he had thought long dead. A desire to protect, to matter to someone. She was strong and brave and beautiful, and he barely knew her, but already he could feel something shifting inside his chest. The night passed slowly. He dozed in fits and starts, always alert for danger, but none came. When the eastern sky began to lighten, he built up the fire again and made more coffee. Beatrice woke as the sun crested the canyon rim, flooding the campsite with golden light. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, sitting up and pushing hair from her face. "Enough. How are you feeling?" "Sore." "Scared, but alive." She stood and stretched, then went to the creek to splash water on her face. When she came back, her hair was damp and pulled back into a simple braid. "What is the plan?" "We ride for Palisade. Should make it by afternoon if we start soon. Your uncle will be wondering what happened when the coach does not arrive." They broke camp quickly, sharing more hardtack and jerky before mounting Copper. Today Beatrice was less rigid, settling against him with more ease. As they rode, she asked him questions about the desert, the wildlife, the mountains in the distance. He found himself enjoying the conversation, the easy way she listened and asked follow-up questions that showed she was genuinely interested. "Have you been to Palisade before?" she asked as they followed a trail that wound between red rock formations. "Never. I hear it is a decent-sized town, though. Silver mining has brought in a lot of people. Do you think you will stay? You said you were looking for work." "I had thought about it. There is usually work at the mines or ranches nearby, but I have got no ties anywhere. I go where the work is." She was quiet for a moment. "That sounds lonely." It was. He had not realized just how lonely until this moment, with her warmth against him and her voice in his ear. "It is the way of things," he said. "It does not have to be." He did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They rode on as the sun climbed higher, the heat building. Cassidy shared his canteen with her regularly, knowing the desert sun could be brutal to someone not used to it. By noon they crested a rise and saw Palisade spread out in the valley below. It was larger than he expected, maybe 400 or 500 people. He could see the mine works on the hillside beyond the town, the timber structures and piles of tailings. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with buildings that had the look of being thrown up quickly but built to last. There was a church with a white steeple, a large building that was probably a hotel, several saloons, a general store, and various other businesses. "There it is," Beatrice said, and he could hear the nervousness in her voice. "My new home." They rode down into the town, attracting looks from the people on the street. A woman riding double with a man, both dusty from travel, was not exactly unusual, but Beatrice's fine dress marked her as someone of means, which made people curious. Cassidy stopped in front of the general store where an older man was sweeping the boardwalk. "Excuse me, sir. Can you direct me to the assayer's office?" The man pointed down the street. "3 buildings down on the left. Oliver Olsen runs it. You got business with him. I am bringing his niece. Her coach had trouble on the road." The man's eyes widened. "That is Oliver's niece. He has been worried sick. Coach was supposed to arrive yesterday evening. I will go fetch him." Before Cassidy could respond, the man had dropped his broom and hurried off. Cassidy dismounted and helped Beatrice down. Within minutes, a tall man in his 40s came rushing toward them, the storekeeper pointing them out. "Beatrice, is that you?" The man's face was lined with worry. "Uncle Oliver." Beatrice stepped forward hesitantly. "Thank God you are all right. When the coach did not arrive, I feared the worst. What happened?" He looked at Cassidy with suspicion. "Who is this?" "This is Cassidy Porter. He saved my life." Beatrice's voice shook as she continued. "We were attacked by outlaws. Henry Matthews, the driver, was killed. Cassidy drove them off and helped me bury Henry and brought me here." Oliver's face went pale. "Henry is dead, dear Lord, his poor wife, his children." He turned to Cassidy, and his suspicion was replaced with gratitude. "You saved my niece." "I helped where I could," Cassidy said simply. "Come, both of you. You must be exhausted. My home is just behind my office. We will get you cleaned up and fed, and you must tell me everything." Oliver put his arm around Beatrice, and she leaned into him, some of her strength finally giving out now that she was safe. Cassidy followed them to a modest but well-kept house behind the assayer's office. It had 3 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen, and 2 smaller bedrooms. Oliver immediately set about making tea while Beatrice collapsed into a chair. Cassidy stood awkwardly by the door until Oliver waved him in. "Sit, sit. You are a guest in my home, a hero from what my niece says." "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Beatrice said firmly. "Not anyone. Most men would have ridden past. You risked your life for strangers." She told Oliver everything, from the attack to the burial to the night camp to their ride into town. By the end, Oliver had tears in his eyes. "Henry was a good man. I have known his wife Sarah for years. I must go tell her, though it will break her heart." He looked at Cassidy. "You said you gave him a proper burial as you could." "Yes, sir. Mark the grave with a stone. It is about 20 miles back along the canyon road, near a stand of oaks by the creek. I can take men there if his wife wants him brought back to town for reburial. I am sure she will want that, and I am sure she will want to thank you." Oliver poured tea for all of them. "You mentioned work. Are you staying in Palisade?" "I was hoping to find something, yes." "Then consider yourself employed. I need a man I can trust, someone reliable and honest. My business takes me out to the mines regularly, testing ore samples, making assessments. It can be dangerous work. I have had samples stolen, been threatened by miners who did not like my assessments. I could use someone to watch my back." Cassidy was surprised. "I do not know anything about assaying." "You do not need to. I need someone who can handle trouble and keep me safe. The pay is $30 a month plus room and board. I've got a small cabin out back I use for storage. It is not much, but it has a bed and a stove. You can stay there." It was more than Cassidy had expected. Steady work, decent pay, and a place to stay. "That is generous, sir. I accept." "Good. Then it is settled. You can start by helping me tell Sarah Matthews what happened to her husband, and then leading a crew to bring him back." Oliver's face was heavy with sorrow. "It is a terrible business, but it must be done." They spent the next few hours dealing with the grim task. Sarah Matthews lived in a small house on the edge of town with her 3 children. When Oliver told her what had happened, her grief was terrible to witness. She collapsed into sobs, clutching her youngest child while the older 2 stood silent and shocked. Cassidy waited outside, feeling like an intruder on private sorrow. When Oliver finally emerged, he looked aged. "She wants him brought back for burial in the church cemetery. Can you lead a group out at first light tomorrow?" "Yes, sir." "Good man. Come, let me show you the cabin. You look dead on your feet." The cabin was small, as promised, just 1 room with a narrow bed, a potbelly stove, a table and chair, and a few shelves. But it was clean and dry and more than Cassidy had hoped for. He stabled Copper in Oliver's small barn, making sure the mare had feed and water, then returned to the cabin and collapsed onto the bed. He woke to a knock at the door. The light outside told him it was late afternoon. He opened the door to find Beatrice standing there with a plate covered with a cloth. "I brought you dinner. Uncle Oliver said not to wake you earlier, but you must be starving." She stepped inside as he held the door open. She had changed from her torn travel dress into a simple blue cotton dress that made her eyes look even more vivid. Her hair was properly pinned up now, and she looked more composed, though he could still see the shadow of yesterday's trauma in her eyes. "Thank you. You did not have to do that." "It is the least I can do. You saved my life." She set the plate on the table. It held roasted chicken, potatoes, and greens. His stomach growled at the sight. "Uncle Oliver told me you are staying, working for him. He made me a generous offer. I would have been a fool to refuse." She smiled, and it transformed her face. "I am glad. It is selfish of me, but I am glad you will be here. Everyone else is a stranger, but you are familiar, safe." He did not know what to say. She was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Finally, she moved toward the door. "I should let you eat. Uncle Oliver wants to have breakfast together tomorrow before you leave to get Henry. I will be there." She paused at the door, looking back. "Cassidy, thank you, not just for saving me, but for being kind, for treating me like I matter. You do matter." She held his gaze for a long moment, then slipped out the door. Cassidy stood staring after her, his heart beating faster than it should. He barely knew this woman, but already she had gotten under his skin. He told himself it was just the circumstance, the danger they had shared, but he knew it was more than that. There was something about Beatrice Olsen that called to something deep in his soul. He ate the dinner she brought, every bite delicious, then laid back down to sleep. Tomorrow would be hard, dealing with the dead, but it was work that needed doing. And it would give him purpose, give him a reason to stay in Palisade beyond the beautiful woman with sad eyes who had walked into his life on a dusty road. The next morning, he led a crew of 4 men back to the canyon. They brought a wagon and shovels and worked in respectful silence to exhume Henry Matthews' body. They wrapped him in canvas and loaded him into the wagon, then made the long journey back to Palisade. Sarah Matthews met them at the church, her face swollen from crying, and thanked Cassidy with a grip on his hand that was almost painful in its intensity. "You gave him a proper burial when you could have just left him. You brought him home to his family. I will never forget that kindness." The funeral was 2 days later. It seemed like the whole town turned out. Henry had been well liked, a steady, reliable man who had worked hard for his family. Cassidy stood at the back of the church, feeling out of place, but Beatrice found him afterward. "Will you walk with me?" she asked. They walked through the town and up into the hills beyond, following a trail that wound between scrub brush and rock formations. She was quiet for a long time, just walking, and he was content to be near her. Finally, she stopped at a high point that overlooked the town and the valley beyond. "I cannot stop thinking about it," she said quietly. "The gunshot, the look on those men's faces, Henry lying in the dust, it plays over and over in my mind. That is natural. You went through something terrible. How do you manage it? You must have seen awful things living the life you have." He thought about that. "I remember that for every bad man there are good ones. For every act of cruelty there are acts of kindness. And I try to be one of the good ones, to do the kind things, so maybe the balance tips a little more toward the light." She turned to look at him. "You are a good man, Cassidy Porter. I knew it the moment you appeared on that canyon rim. I am just a cowboy trying to do right. No, you are more than that." She stepped closer. "I have been thinking about what you said, about how lonely your life has been. Mine has been lonely too. I lost my parents, then had to live with an aunt who did not want me, and now I am here in a strange town where I know no one except an uncle I just met. But when I am with you, I do not feel lonely. I feel safe, seen, like I matter to someone." His heart was pounding. "You matter to me, Beatrice. More than you should, considering we just met, but I cannot seem to help it." She smiled, that transformative smile that made her whole face light up. "I am glad I am not the only one feeling this way. I thought perhaps I was being foolish. Not foolish. Maybe a little crazy, but not foolish." She laughed, and the sound was like music. They stood together on that hilltop as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Cassidy felt something settle in his chest. A sense of rightness, of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Over the following weeks, Cassidy threw himself into his work. Oliver was a good man and a good boss, treating him fairly and with respect. The work was interesting, traveling to the various mine claims in the area, watching Oliver test ore samples and negotiate with miners. There were moments of tension, times when miners disputed Oliver's assessments or tried to intimidate him into a better evaluation, but Cassidy's presence usually kept things civil. He never had to draw his gun, but the fact that he wore it and clearly knew how to use it was enough. In the evenings, he would often have dinner with Oliver and Beatrice. She was settling into life in Palisade, taking a job helping the schoolteacher with the younger children and keeping books for her uncle. She had a quick mind and a warm heart, and Cassidy found himself drawn to her more with each passing day. They would walk together after dinner sometimes, exploring the hills around town or just strolling through the streets as the day cooled. They talked about everything, their pasts and their hopes for the future, their fears and their dreams. She told him about her parents, how much she missed them, how she sometimes woke up in the night and forgot for a moment that they were gone. He told her about the ranch, about learning to ride and rope before he could barely walk, about the devastation of watching his family lose everything. "You still want a ranch of your own?" she asked one evening as they sat on a bench outside the general store. "I used to dream about it. But dreams like that require money, and I am just now starting to build up any savings. It feels impossible sometimes. My father used to say that impossible just means it will take longer. If you want it badly enough, you will find a way. What about you? What do you dream about?" She was quiet for a moment. "I used to dream about falling in love, getting married, having a family of my own. But after my parents died, those dreams felt smaller, less possible. I thought I would end up a spinster dependent on relatives, always feeling like a burden. You are not a burden. And those dreams are still possible." She looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that made his breath catch. "Are they?" He took her hand, marveling at how small it felt in his. "Beatrice, I know we have not known each other long, but I need you to know something. These weeks with you they have been the happiest of my life. When I am with you, I feel like maybe I could have those dreams again, a home, a family, a future. Cassidy." Her voice was soft. "I feel the same way. I know it is fast. I know people will say we are being foolish. But I cannot help how I feel. When I am with you, everything makes sense." He leaned closer and she met him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they pulled apart, she was smiling. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," she admitted. "So have I." They sat together as the stars came out, hands clasped, talking quietly about the future. It was not a proposal, not yet, but it was a promise. A promise that they would figure this out together, that they would not let fear or circumstance steal what they had found in each other. The months that followed were some of the best of Cassidy's life. He and Beatrice were inseparable, spending every moment they could together. Oliver approved of the relationship, seeing how happy his niece was, how Cassidy treated her with respect and tenderness. The town began to talk, of course, but it was mostly good-natured speculation about when the wedding would be. That winter, Cassidy began making plans. He had been saving every penny he could, and Oliver had been generous with bonuses when assaying jobs went particularly well. By the time spring arrived, Cassidy had enough saved to make a start on his dream. He approached Oliver one evening after dinner. Beatrice had gone to bed early, tired from a long day teaching, and the two men sat by the fire with coffee. "Sir, I want to ask your permission for something." Oliver smiled. "If you are asking to marry my niece, you have my blessing. You have had it for months." Cassidy felt relief wash over him. "Thank you, sir. That means a great deal, but I want to do this right. I want to be able to provide for her. I have been looking at land for sale. There is a ranch about 10 miles from here, up in the higher country. 200 acres with water rights to a creek. The man who owns it is getting too old to work it and wants to sell. He is asking $500. That is a substantial amount. I have 300 saved. I was hoping. I know it is a lot to ask, but if you could loan me the other 200, I would pay you back with interest. 5% annually, paid in installments. I could have it paid off in 2 years, maybe less. Oliver studied him for a long moment. You are serious about this, about making a life here? I am, sir. I want to marry Beatrice and build something lasting, something she can be proud of. She already is proud of you, but I understand the need to provide. Very well. I will loan you the 200, but I will not take interest. Consider it a wedding present. Cassidy was overwhelmed. Sir, I cannot accept that. It is too generous. You saved my niece's life. You have been a loyal employee and a good friend. You have made Beatrice happier than I have ever seen her. This is my way of saying thank you and welcome to the family. They shook hands, and Cassidy felt tears sting his eyes. He had been alone for so long, drifting without purpose or connection. Now he had a future, a family, a reason to build something lasting. He proposed to Beatrice the next evening, taking her up to the hilltop where they had first talked about loneliness and connection. The sunset was spectacular, the sky ablaze with color, and when he got down on one knee and offered her the simple gold band he had bought at the general store, she cried and said yes, before he could even get all the words out. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes, she said, pulling him to his feet and kissing him. I love you, Cassidy Porter. I have loved you since that day in the canyon when you appeared like some kind of guardian angel. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible. They were married a month later in the church where they had attended Henry Matthews' funeral. Sarah Matthews came with her children, pressing a handmade quilt into Beatrice's hands. Henry would have wanted you to have this. He would have been happy knowing something good came from that terrible day, that you two found each other. It was a simple ceremony, but perfect. Beatrice wore a new dress of cream-colored silk that Oliver had ordered special from Tucson. Cassidy wore his best clothes, freshly cleaned and pressed. The church was full of people from town, neighbors and friends they had made over the past months. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Cassidy kissed his bride and felt like the luckiest man alive. They spent their wedding night in the hotel, Oliver having booked them the finest room as a gift. In the morning, they loaded a wagon with supplies and wedding presents and headed out to their new ranch. The property was everything Cassidy had hoped for. The house was small but solid, 2 rooms with a loft, built of sturdy timber with a stone fireplace. The land rolled gently up into pine-covered hills, with good grazing and a creek that ran year-round. There was a barn and a corral, both in need of repair but serviceable. The previous owner had left behind a few head of cattle and some chickens, a starting point for building a herd. It is perfect, Beatrice said, standing in the doorway of what would be their home. It is ours. They threw themselves into the work of making the ranch productive. Cassidy worked from dawn to dusk, mending fences, repairing buildings, tending the cattle. Beatrice proved to be a natural at ranch life, despite her upbringing. She kept the house, tended a garden, managed the chickens, and even learned to help with the cattle when needed. In the evenings, they would collapse into bed exhausted but happy, holding each other close and talking about their plans. I think we should focus on building up the cattle herd this year, Cassidy said one night as they lay together. If we can get through the winter without losing too many head, we can sell some next spring and use the money to buy more land or improve the property. Whatever you think is best, you are the rancher. She traced patterns on his chest with her finger, although I have been thinking, what if we also raised horses? Good horses are always in demand and the land here is perfect for it. That is not a bad idea. We would need a stallion and some good mares to start, but it could work. He kissed her forehead. You have a good head for business. I learned from my parents. They always said diversity was important. Do not put all your eggs in one basket. They implemented both ideas over the following year. Cassidy purchased a young stallion and 3 mares from a horse trader passing through Palisade, and Beatrice took charge of managing the breeding program. She had a natural way with horses, gentle but firm, and the animals responded to her. Meanwhile, Cassidy worked on building up the cattle herd, making deals with other ranchers and traveling to Tucson to purchase additional stock. It was hard work, backbreaking at times, but they were building something together. Every fence post set, every calf born, every horse trained was a piece of their shared dream taking solid form. And through it all, their love deepened. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, how to work together seamlessly, when to push and when to yield. That first winter was hard. Snow came early and stayed late, and they lost some cattle to the cold and wolves. There were nights when Cassidy lay awake worrying about money, about whether they would make it, whether he had been foolish to take on so much so fast. But Beatrice never wavered. We will make it through, she would say, holding him close. We have each other, and we have this land, and we are willing to work. That is enough. And it was. When spring came, the surviving cattle were healthy and strong, and 3 mares gave birth to healthy foals that would be the foundation of their horse breeding program. They had made it through the worst, and they had done it together. In the summer, Beatrice began feeling ill in the mornings. At first, they thought it was something she ate, but when it continued for weeks, she went to see the doctor in Palisade. She came back with news that made Cassidy's heart feel too big for his chest. We are having a baby, she said, tears of joy streaming down her face. We are going to be parents. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure happiness. A baby. We are having a baby. The pregnancy was hard on Beatrice. She was sick frequently, tired all the time, but she never complained. Cassidy took on more of the work, insisting she rest as much as possible. Oliver came out regularly to check on them, bringing supplies and news from town. Sarah Matthews came too, bringing her experience as a mother of 3 and practical help with preparing for the baby. You will be wonderful parents, Sarah said one afternoon as she helped Beatrice sew tiny clothes. That baby is lucky to have you both. In the cold of February 1884, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, with the doctor traveling out from Palisade through a snowstorm to assist. Cassidy paced outside in the cold, praying harder than he ever had in his life, until finally he heard the thin wail of a newborn. The doctor emerged, smiling. Congratulations, you have a son. Mother and baby are both doing well. Cassidy rushed inside to find Beatrice propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. Come meet your son. He approached carefully, almost afraid to touch something so small and perfect. The baby had a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. When Cassidy reached out, those tiny fingers wrapped around his, and he felt his heart melt completely. He is perfect, Cassidy whispered. You are perfect. What should we name him? Beatrice asked. They had discussed names for months, going back and forth on various options. But looking down at this tiny person, Cassidy knew exactly what felt right. Henry. For the man whose death brought us together. So that something good comes from tragedy and his name lives on. Beatrice smiled through her tears. Henry Porter, it is perfect. Being parents changed everything. The work was still hard, but now it had even more meaning. They were building not just for themselves, but for Henry, for his future. Cassidy worked himself to exhaustion making sure the ranch was profitable, that they would have security. Beatrice managed the house and the baby with grace, somehow finding time to also help with the horses and keep the books. Henry was a happy baby, quick to smile, and he grew strong and healthy. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything, exploring his world with fearless curiosity. Watching him grow, teaching him about the ranch and the animals, filled Cassidy with a satisfaction he had never known. The ranch prospered. Their cattle herd grew steadily, and Beatrice's horse breeding program was producing quality animals that sold for good prices. By Henry's second birthday, they had paid off Oliver's loan in full and had money in the bank. They purchased an additional 100 acres adjoining their property and hired a young man named Tom to help with the work. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Work and family, hard days and peaceful evenings, the cycle of seasons marking time. Cassidy would sometimes think back to that day in the canyon, to the gunshot that had changed his life forever, and feel nothing but gratitude. Yes, it had been born of violence and tragedy, but it had led him here. To Beatrice, to Henry, to a home and a purpose and a life filled with love. When Henry was 3, Beatrice announced she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1887 they welcomed a daughter. They named her Clara, after Beatrice's mother, and she had her mother's blue eyes and delicate features. Henry was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help, to hold her and show her things. "You are a good big brother," Beatrice told him one afternoon as he gently rocked Clara's cradle. "She is small," Henry said seriously. "I have to be careful." Cassidy watched his family with a heart full of love. This was everything he had ever wanted and more than he had ever hoped for. A wife he adored, children who were healthy and happy, land he could work and take pride in. He had gone from a drifting cowboy with no prospects to a rancher with a family and a future. The years rolled on, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, dealt with rustlers and predators, celebrated good years and struggled through lean ones. But they did it together, as a family, as partners in every sense of the word. Henry grew into a sturdy boy who loved the ranch and the animals. He learned to ride almost before he could walk properly, and by age 7 he was helping with the cattle and horses like a seasoned hand. Clara was quieter, more thoughtful, but she had her mother's way with horses and her father's determination. Together, the children were a joy. When Henry was 8 and Clara 5, Beatrice surprised Cassidy again with news of another pregnancy. This one resulted in twin boys, born healthy and strong in the summer of 1892. They named them James and William, and the house suddenly felt very full and very loud. 4 children, Cassidy said one evening, holding one of the twins while Beatrice nursed the other. Henry and Clara were playing on the floor nearby. "We have 4 children." "We do," Beatrice said, smiling at him over William's head. "Are you overwhelmed?" "I am blessed. Every single day I am blessed." The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They now had several hired hands, a larger house they had built to accommodate their growing family, and a reputation for producing quality cattle and horses. Cassidy's name was known throughout the territory as a fair dealer and a skilled rancher. Beatrice managed the business side, keeping meticulous books and handling sales and purchases with a sharp mind for negotiation. Oliver came out regularly to visit, delighting in his great nieces and nephews. He was getting older now, talking about retiring from assaying work. Sarah Matthews' children had grown and moved away, but she remained a close friend, often visiting and helping with the younger children. One evening, after the children were all in bed and the house was finally quiet, Cassidy and Beatrice sat on the porch watching the sunset. It was something they tried to do as often as possible, these moments of peace and connection amidst the chaos of family life. "You ever think about that day?" Beatrice asked. "In the canyon, sometimes. Usually when I am feeling particularly grateful. I think about it often. About how one moment can change everything. If you had ridden past, if those outlaws had been quicker, if any number of things had gone differently, we would not be here right now. But we are here. That is what matters." She leaned against him and he put his arm around her. "I love you, Cassidy Porter. I have loved you from almost the moment I met you, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Beatrice Porter. You are everything I never knew I needed." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. In the distance, they could hear the cattle lowing, the horses moving in the corral, the sounds of their life, their dream made real. The years continued to pass, marked by milestones and memories. Henry's first successful cattle drive at age 14. Clara's 15th birthday, when she broke and trained her first horse completely on her own. The twins graduating from the small school in Palisade. Each child grew into their own person, with their own dreams and personalities, but all of them loved the ranch and understood the work their parents had put into building it. When Henry turned 18 in 1899, Cassidy and Beatrice had a long talk with him about his future. "This ranch will be yours someday," Cassidy told his oldest son. "You and your siblings will inherit all of this, but you need to decide if it is what you want or if you want to make your own way." Henry looked at his father with surprise. "Of course I want the ranch. I have always wanted this. Working with you, building on what you and Ma created, that is my dream." Cassidy felt pride swell in his chest. "Then we will make you a partner. You have earned it." They drew up papers making Henry a junior partner in the ranch, giving him a stake in the operation and a say in decisions. Clara, when she turned 18 a few years later, was offered the same, and she accepted eagerly. The twins were still young, but Cassidy and Beatrice planned to do the same for them when the time came. The turn of the century brought changes. The Wild West was becoming less wild, with more law and order, more civilization creeping in. Palisade had grown substantially, now sporting a telegraph office and even talk of a railway spur being built. The territory of Arizona was moving toward statehood, and everyone knew it was just a matter of time. But on the ranch, some things stayed the same. The work was still hard. The land still demanded respect and effort, and the love that had built this place remained as strong as ever. Cassidy was in his early 40s now, his hair showing threads of gray, his hands worn from years of hard work. But he was healthy and strong, and when he looked at Beatrice, he still saw the beautiful woman who had stood up to outlaws with a daring and courage. She had aged too, lines forming at the corners of her eyes, her figure changed by bearing 4 children, but to him she was as lovely as the day they met. "Do you have any regrets?" she asked him one evening as they prepared for bed. "About what?" "About how our life turned out. We worked so hard. There were so many struggles. Do you ever wish things had been easier?" He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "Not for a single moment. Every struggle made us stronger. Every challenge we overcame together. I would not change a thing. Not even the beginning, the violence, Henry's death. I wish Henry had not died. I wish you had not had to experience that terror. But I cannot wish away what brought us together. Does that make me selfish? No, it makes you human." She looked up at him. "I feel the same way. I hate that Henry died. But I cannot regret what followed because it gave me you. It gave me our children and this life. I suppose we honor his memory best by living well, by being happy. We have done that, and we will keep doing it." As the years moved into the new century, the ranch continued to thrive. They now owned over 500 acres, employed 8 hands full-time, and had herds that were the envy of neighboring ranchers. Henry had proven himself an astute partner, bringing new ideas while respecting his father's experience. Clara ran the horse breeding operation with skill and passion. The twins were now teenagers, helping with the work and talking about their own futures. Oliver passed away peacefully in 1905, leaving his assaying business and his home to Beatrice. She sold the business but kept the house in Palisade, using it when the family needed to stay in town for supplies or business. His death was sad, but he had lived a good long life and had been surrounded by family at the end. Sarah Matthews followed a few years later, and at her funeral, her children spoke about how their father's death had devastated them. But their mother's resilience and the kindness of friends like Cassidy and Beatrice had helped them through. It was a reminder that their actions all those years ago had ripples that extended far beyond themselves. By 1910, Cassidy and Beatrice were in their late 40s, considered elders in the ranching community. Young ranchers would come to them for advice. They were respected and prosperous, but more than that, they were happy. Their children were grown or nearly so, all 4 of them healthy and capable. Henry was now managing much of the daily operations of the ranch. Clara had married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man named Peter who treated her well and shared her love of horses. They lived on their own spread, but were frequent visitors. The twins, James and William, had decided to attend university in Tucson, studying business and engineering respectively. It had been a hard decision for them, leaving the ranch, but Cassidy and Beatrice had encouraged them to pursue their education. "You can always come back to the ranch," Cassidy had told them, "but you should see what else the world has to offer. Make informed choices about your future." With the older children grown and independent, Cassidy and Beatrice found themselves with more time together. They took long rides across their land, sometimes camping out under the stars like they had in the early days. They traveled to Tucson and even as far as San Francisco, seeing sights they had only read about. But they always came back to the ranch. It was home. It was where their story had led them, where they had built their life. One evening, on the anniversary of their wedding, Cassidy took Beatrice back to the hilltop above Palisade where he had proposed. They were older now, gray-haired and weathered, but when he looked at her in the sunset light, he saw every version of her. The terrified young woman in a torn dress, the beautiful bride in cream silk, the exhausted but radiant new mother, the partner who worked beside him through countless days. The love of his life. 25 years, he said. Has it really been that long? It feels like both forever and no time at all, she replied. When I think about everything we have been through, everything we have built, it seems impossible that it could fit into 25 years. We have been lucky. We have been blessed, and we worked hard, and we loved each other through everything. She took his hand. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. So would I. They stood together as the sun set, just as they had so many years before, and watched the sky turn glorious colors. Below them, Palisade spread out, so much larger than when they had first arrived. Beyond the town, hidden from view but always present in their hearts, was the ranch. Their home. Their legacy. The years that followed were gentler. With Henry running the ranch and the other children established in their own lives, Cassidy and Beatrice were able to slow down. They still worked, still contributed, but the desperate drive to succeed was gone. They had succeeded. Now they could enjoy the fruits of their labor. Grandchildren began arriving. Clara had a son first, then a daughter. Henry married a schoolteacher from Palisade, a sensible woman named Margaret, and they had 3 children in quick succession. Even the twins, after finishing university, returned to Arizona. James started a freight business in Tucson, while William became a civil engineer working on the new railroads spreading across the state. Both married and started families. Cassidy and Beatrice found themselves surrounded by grandchildren, and they reveled in it. The ranch house was often full of young voices, small hands reaching for Grandpa to lift them up on a horse or Grandma to tell them a story. They told the children about the old days, about how the ranch started, about working hard and loving harder. But they never told them about that day in the canyon, about the violence and terror that had brought them together. That story was theirs alone, a private foundation upon which everything else had been built. Arizona became a state in 1912, and it felt like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. The Wild West was truly gone now, replaced by ordered civilization. But the land remained, and the work remained, and the love that had sustained Cassidy and Beatrice for 30 years remained strong. They grew old together, gracefully, their hands finding each other automatically after decades of marriage. They could communicate with a look, finish each other's sentences, know what the other needed before words were spoken. It was the kind of deep partnership that only comes from years of shared experience and unwavering commitment. In 1920, they celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary. The whole family gathered at the ranch, children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. There was food and music and laughter, the house and yard full of life and love. Cassidy looked around at it all, at the family he and Beatrice had created, and felt overwhelming gratitude. That night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, he and Beatrice sat on their porch in the rocking chairs Henry had made them for their 35th anniversary. "We did good," he said simply. "We did," she agreed. "We took a terrible moment and built something beautiful from it." I think about him sometimes. Henry Matthews. Wonder what he would think, knowing his death led to all of this. I think he would be glad. His wife told me once before she died that she could not be bitter because our happiness was proof that even tragedy can have meaning. That touched me deeply. They rocked in comfortable silence, holding hands. Cassidy was 60 now, Beatrice 58. They were slowing down, aches and pains reminding them daily that time moved forward for everyone. But they were healthy and they were together and they were surrounded by love. "When I go," Cassidy said quietly, "I want you to know that every single day with you was a gift, that I never took you for granted, that loving you was the greatest privilege of my life. Do not talk about going, we have years yet. I know, but I want you to know anyway." She squeezed his hand. "And when I go, I want you to know that you saved me in every way a person can be saved, not just from those outlaws, but from a life of loneliness and purposelessness. You gave me everything. A home, a family, a love I did not think was possible. We saved each other." "Yes, we did." They sat together as the stars came out one by one, filling the sky with light. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Closer, they could hear the horses moving in the barn, the soft sounds of the ranch settling for the night. This was their life. This was their legacy. And it was good. Cassidy and Beatrice lived many more years, into their 70s, watching their family continue to grow and thrive. The ranch passed fully to Henry and his siblings, but Cassidy and Beatrice remained involved as long as they were able, offering advice and wisdom earned through decades of experience. They died within months of each other, first Cassidy in his sleep one peaceful night in 1932, and then Beatrice, who seemed to simply let go once her partner was gone. They were buried side by side on a hillside on the ranch, overlooking the land they had built together. At the funeral, Henry stood before the gathered family and friends and told the story his parents had shared with him in their final years. About the canyon and the outlaws, about the courage of a young woman with a derringer and a cowboy who could not ride past someone in trouble. About how a single moment of choice had led to a lifetime of love. They taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day, Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. A choice to stand together, to work together, to build something that lasts. They taught us that from tragedy can come beauty, that hard work brings rewards, and that family is everything. We are all here because of the choices they made, the love they shared. And we honor them best by living as they did, with courage and commitment and love. The family remained on the ranch for generations after, each one adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation Cassidy and Beatrice had laid. The brand they had created, a simple C and B intertwined, marked cattle and horses throughout Arizona. Their names were spoken with respect in ranching circles. But more than that, their love story became a family legend, told and retold, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope and love can prevail. The little house where they started, though expanded and renovated many times, remained standing. The creek still ran year-round. The land they had fought for and nurtured continued to provide. And somewhere in the hills above Palisade, there was still a spot where, if you stood at sunset, you could see the whole valley spread out below and feel, just for a moment, the echo of a love that had transformed two lonely people into a family, a dream into a legacy, a single act of courage into a story that would last forever. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the acres or the cattle or the success, though those were important. What mattered was that Cassidy Porter, a drifting cowboy with no prospects, had heard a gunshot and chosen to help. That Beatrice Olsen, terrified and alone, had found the courage to trust a stranger. That they had recognized in each other something worth fighting for, worth building toward. That they had taken a moment born of violence and transformed it through love and hard work into something beautiful and lasting. Their story was uniquely theirs, but it was also universal. It was about choosing love over fear, commitment over convenience, hope over despair. It was about two people who found each other against all odds and built a life that mattered. And it was a reminder that sometimes the most important moments of our lives arrive unexpectedly, in the form of a gunshot echoing through a canyon, and that what we choose to do in those moments can change everything. Cassidy and Beatrice's great-great-grandchildren still worked the ranch in the late 20th century, still told the story of how it all began. The brand still bore their initials. The land still responded to hard work and careful stewardship. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the sun was setting, family members would sometimes stand on that hillside where Cassidy and Beatrice were buried and feel the weight of history, the presence of love, the continuity of family. It was a fitting end to a story that had begun with violence, but had been transformed by love into something that endured. Cassidy had ridden toward danger to help a stranger, and in doing so, he had found his future. Beatrice had survived tragedy and found in its aftermath a love that sustained her for a lifetime. Together, they had built not just a ranch but a legacy, not just a family but a testament to the power of choosing love every single day, no matter what challenges arose. And that, in the end, was the truest measure of their lives, not what they accumulated or achieved but how they loved. Deeply, faithfully, persistently, through good times and bad, through youth and age, through all the years that had been given to them. They had loved well and they had loved true, and their story continued to inspire long after they were gone. That was the real happily ever after, the closed ending that wrapped everything together. A life well lived, a love that lasted, and a legacy that endured. It was everything Cassidy had hoped for when he heard that gunshot in the canyon, and everything Beatrice had dreamed of in her darkest moments. It was, simply and completely enough. It was everything. And their love story, begun in dust and danger on a wild West afternoon, had become eternal.